Zelensky's prescription is global thermonuclear war launched by the United States against Russia. It's insane. It makes no sense. And my great fear is that there are people in Washington that don't understand that that is the inevitable outcome if we don't take the off-ramp and get off of this dead-end road that we're on with Zelensky, because that's what he wants. He just doesn't want Europe to support him. He wants us to make it impossible for Russia to defeat him or anyone else. Well, that's not going to happen. We have no interest in that. And I think that President Trump foolishly listens to this man, and obviously to people around him, who tell him that we are more powerful than we are, that we are in a position to dictate terms which we're not. And this man, Zelensky, is evidence for all of that kind of thinking. So the real question at this stage is, President Trump, what are you going to do to extricate the United States from this utterly pointless and fruitless policy that you inherited from President Biden? Thus far, his answer is nothing. I'm going to keep it up. I'm going to continue to do it. And if you really want to push this to the limits, you will end up in a nuclear exchange with Russia. The Russians have been very straightforward. We understand the conditions that they've described. None of those are unacceptable, frankly, to us. We do not lose as a result of supporting neutrality for whatever remains of Ukraine. We don't lose with a government in Kiev that is at least not hostile, if not aligned with Moscow. We lose if we are dragged into a war over a part of the world that is of no strategic importance to us against Russia. That's how we lose. And what you saw again over in China was a group of people, what is it, more than 40% of the world's population, and probably at least half of its natural resources, mineral wealth, oil, gas, you name it. We saw a demonstration that they have all gotten together and said, we would like to have peace in our time with the United States, but we will not submit to Donald Trump's bullying tactics. So he's got to make a decision. Where does he want to take us? Further and further down the road to disaster and potential war? Or does he want to get off the train, go somewhere else in a new direction? But see, this is also bound up with this financial system that we built after the Second World War, which is crumbling. We went to Bretton Woods. We went off the gold standard. We have taken this thing called fiat currency, which has no real value except what we impute to it. And most of that depends on trust in the United States government. Well, I think trust in the United States government is at an all-time low, both overseas and here at home. So the question is, what are we going to do as this crumbles in front of us? Do we simply sink into a depression? Do we restructure the debt? No, nobody goes there. No, we give Besant orders from the White House. Find a new scam, some new means to get around reality. So he's turned to these treasury bills. The whole idea of reevaluating or revaluing gold has gone down the toilet. And part of that, at least, is because no one really knows what we've got. All we know is that the Germans and the Italians who've asked to repatriate their gold, we've told them, no, we're not repatriating all of it. So the question is, well, why not? The suspicion is we don't have it all. You see where I'm going? In other words, we're talking about the Ukraine war, but the Ukraine war that is mightily our responsibility. We built it up. We created the forces in Ukraine. We sent them into action. We've bled the country white. And yet Trump acts as though this is something that happened somewhere else that has nothing to do with us, which of course is absurd. So we've done that. We're in very serious financial trouble. You can't view one in isolation from the other. So if we stay on this track, the question is, which happens first? Are we dragged into an unnecessary self-defeating collision with the Russians on the strategic level, which could invite a nuclear exchange? Or the alternative right now is to continue on the current path and go down financially into total and complete ruin, into something worse than the Depression of the 1930s. So which is it? Which comes first? I'm not an expert, but I think it's pretty clear that's where we are right now.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because there ought to be a third option there, or we can acknowledge reality, cut off this bad deal, to use Trump's terminology there, and just cauterize that wound and start getting back into something in a more normalized relations, which might forestall some of the economic stuff. It may be too late for that, but at least there's an option. But that doesn't appear to be on the table. Ironically, it seems that Vladimir Putin is trying to give Trump an off-ramp by countering one of the biggest accusations that the West makes against Russia, which is always that we got to stop them here because otherwise they're going to roll into France and the UK, which their leaders have said in just the last couple of weeks here. Putin addressed that thing yesterday in Beijing.
As for if the multipolar world has been established or not, well, its outlines are there by and large, but I wouldn't really speak about any domineering poles. It doesn't mean that this new multipolar world should have any hegemons, because no one is speaking about this, not in BRICS, not in the SCO. Everyone has equal rights in this multipolar world. And from international law, everyone must have equal rights, must be in the similar position. Yes, there are economic giants like India or China, and actually our country is among top 4 biggest economies if we speak about purchasing power narrative. These are the current realities. That's not something that we would like to have. That's what international organizations calculate, but it doesn't mean that anyone should dominate over the politics or over global security.
So you see that President Putin there is saying, listen, hey, we're not trying to dominate anyone. We're not trying to, even within BRICS, we're not trying to have this counterweight to the Western way of thinking. We're actually saying it's a multipolar world, and you're one of the poles. So we can continue going down that path, but everyone's going to have equal rights here. So this whole idea that we're getting up and having this big economic and maybe a military bloc in order to, come after you is not true. They don't have any interest in doing that. And Doug, as you said just a minute ago, China is more interested in doing business than they are in conquering anybody.
Well, again, there's an unwillingness. In fact, it was a good report that Dan Grazier just put out talking about the high improbability of any Chinese invasion of Taiwan, which gets all the attention that you can imagine. I think we've lost our touch with reality. China is a nation of 1.4 billion. Every morning Xi wakes up and his number one concern is, how do I hold this country together? People don't understand that. China is got 4 or 5 versions of a nation like the United States within its borders. This is not an easy thing to control. In fact, this is one of the myths that is widespread in the West, that this man Xi is the ultimate super dictator who controls everything, everywhere, all the time. No, in fact, his biggest problem is that he doesn't. And one of the reasons he was appointed to the job was to tackle the biggest problem they face, which is still corruption inside Chinese society. And that corruption has led to the mass don't want to say mass, but the execution and imprisonment of untold numbers of senior officials in the Chinese government, in the military. There are more problems inside China than people in the West appreciate. So and then the false notion, because we project onto China the Western experience, is that, well, to fix these problems, Xi needs a war. The last thing Xi needs is a war. They have just been embarked on the largest building program in human history, certainly since the 1990s. So let's just say 25 years, building cities, building platforms, building transportation, as you name it. If you're interested in doing that sort of thing, the last thing on your mind is what? War. Because what promises to destroy all of that is a war. So there just isn't the evidence for this overwhelming Chinese threat that is like the sword of Damocles hanging over our heads. It's just unreal. But unfortunately, that falls on deaf ears. You have this sick a sort of cyclical predisposition to spend lavishly on defense. And by the way, our return on investment is not very good. We spend more for everything that we have in defense than almost any other country in the world. And then this in turn enriches large numbers of people in Washington. Yes, it does keep assembly lines open in many places. But the biggest beneficiaries are the people that are the quote unquote shareholders. And they have no real interest in peace. And so they are happy to advocate for conflict. And if you look at all the people at the top of the military, no one is stepping forward asking any questions about, well, strategically, would it not make sense for us not to provoke, not to intervene? Did anyone stand up and raise questions about our decision to send this flotilla towards Venezuela? This looks like another Trump exercise insofar as there's no underlying planning or thinking, as far as I can tell. He wakes up, well, we're going to make a point. We're going to make an example out of these people. I want to get rid of Maduro or something. And suddenly everyone is on board and says, yeah, let's sail down to the Caribbean. It was supposed to take 2 days to assemble. It took many, many days to assemble everything because there was no adequate planning, no operational thinking. Mm-hmm. Strategically, we have yet to figure out what these people are supposed to do. Well, I'm 100% for using the U.S. military in the Western Hemisphere to defend us, to defend our interests. But I don't think the use of the U.S. military in the Caribbean to attack Latin American states is necessarily a good idea. There are always second and third effects associated with any military operation. Venezuela is not a robust and powerful state. We all know that. Right. Its society is not necessarily very cohesive. Although I would argue we forced a lot of cohesion on them in the last few days. Yep. That very clearly. But the point is, how does it help us to do this? What difference does it make who is running Venezuela? Are we treating symptoms or are we treating the disease? Well, the disease is here at home. It's we've got to control our borders, control the coastal waters, control airports, get at the people who are bringing the material into the country that's killing us. But we also have to go after the people peddling the drugs here inside the country. We have to do effectively what Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore. And he had a death penalty. If you bring drugs in, if you try to peddle drugs, you face capital punishment. You know what? It worked. But if you bring it up right now, oh, that's terrible. We can never do that. Well, if you're going to take that position, we may not have a society. Because a society that can't enforce laws like that and protect its own population isn't going to last. So instead of invading Venezuela at this point, which I think is a complete waste of time, or blowing up a boat in the ocean that's carrying drugs, and you know from your time on active duty, I do, from having worked down at Joint Integrated Task Force South, GIATF South, that a lot of this stuff comes in much more sophisticated ways to the United States.
Right.
Blowing up this one boat is going to make a damn bit of a difference. But again, it falls into that category that is so important to Donald Trump. Optics.
Yeah.
See, I'm tough. I took guts to go and order somebody to blow a boat up. No, it's strictly speaking, it falls into the category of extrajudicial assassination or murder. It's not strictly legal. Just because the president says, well, these people are terrorists, doesn't necessarily make them terrorists. Do terrorists and drug cartels cooperate? Of course they do. Does it mean everyone in the drug cartel is a terrorist? Does it mean everyone involved with terrorism is a drug peddler? No. These things do matter. The distinctions do matter. And remember, if we know that we're dealing with fragile state structures, if we know that Maduro has very little influence over his own armed forces, he really doesn't, which is not necessarily a good thing, but that's true. We know the president of Mexico has no authority over the Mexican armed forces. The Mexican army is under the control of the drug cartels. Wake up. That's what you're dealing with down there. Now, is the solution to destroy Mexico? I don't think so. I think you have to accept what you're dealing with, recognize what it is, but then you have to also look inwardly. It's one thing we have to defend ourselves against it on the outside. Taking the offense into some other person's society or state is not necessarily a good idea. We have to take the offense inside our country, go after what's inside the country first. And I think to some extent, that's something that Donald Trump would like to do. I don't think anybody's outlined it for him in a way that makes sense. So, on the one hand, we have this ongoing war against Ukraine that really should end as soon as we can find a way to end it, which means let's look at the Russian conditions. Let's sign up minimally for what Putin has said he wants. He wants a neutral Ukraine.
Well, and I want to go back to that conversation you had, or that press conference you had in Beijing yesterday, because there was a couple of other things of note, but one really big one, to where if I argued that he was trying to give Trump a hand by saying, hey, we're not actually trying to go after anybody else, he also showed that there's some limitations on that, because he said we are doing everything we can for negotiations, but if they fail, he said this.
I still believe that if common sense prevails, then an agreement on acceptable way to put an end to this conflict, it is possible. And since we can see the sentiments in the U.S. administration under the leadership of Trump, so we don't hear just mere statements, so we see the sincere desire to find a solution. And I believe there is light in the end of the tunnel, so we will see how the situation develops, how it unfolds. Well, if not, then we will have to accomplish our goals via military means.
So he was very matter-of-factly there, not even mincing words anywhere. He said, yeah, we care about President Trump. We were happy to be working with him. We're looking for solutions. But if we don't find the solutions, there is another one on the table, and we will simply continue to go until we get our military objectives met via military, meaning they'll simply win the war. Is that just him making a bunch of statements and trying to look tough, or do you think he means it?
No, I think he's absolutely serious. And we have to understand there's tremendous pressure on him at home. Everybody talks about Vladimir Putin, the dictator. It's very misleading. He looks at the opinion polls. He listens to the Russian people. Let me tell you something. The Russian people want this war to end on the terms that he's outlined. And they don't care if they have to march all the way to the Polish border. Now, that's something that Putin has never wanted to do. He's stayed focused on Luhansk, Donetsk, Kherson, essentially Novorossiya, New Russia. And that's laudable, but I think he's coming around to understanding that we're not going to do business with him. It doesn't make any difference what he says. President Trump doesn't understand, and President Trump is only interested in what President Trump benefits from. He's personally invested in what he thinks is important for himself. And that's not a good way forward in international relations. You have to think in terms of the broader community of states and nations. You have to think in terms of your own standard of living, your economic health. Trump is not there, and I think Putin knows that. So he's just going to plow ahead. Now, he has something very important working for him, and we in the United States are not paying nearly enough attention to this. Von der Leyen is standing on thin ice. She could be removed any day. Everyone in Europe has had it with the European Union. People do not want to be ruled from Brussels. What Orban began, what Orban began and what Fico has joined, and I think others are joining very rapidly, is this recognition this all needs to stop. And they're not going to take orders anymore from the EU. The EU is dying. NATO is sort of a long column of cars in a clown show, and they're all chugging along and making noise, but the engines really don't drive very well. There's lots of smoke and fire, but there's nothing to it. NATO is doomed. It's a waste of time. So I think these are the things that we need to be honest about. We refuse to be honest about them. Instead, we treat everything as though it's solid gold. Nothing can change. The world of the future will look like the world of the past. And at some point, it's going to be impossible to conceal these facts from the American people. And it's going to happen soon. I don't know where it starts. I always thought it would start in France and then spread. It may start now in Great Britain. I mean, their economy is definitely tanking. We're linked to it very closely. The banks in London and the banks in New York City are intimately familiar with each other and inextricably intertwined. All of this is coming to a head.